Real Madrid pretty much dominating this game, something that we absolutely expected, especially after a long flight over there. They were actually closer to the Great Wall of China than they were to anywhere in continental Europe. Interesting. That's my little interesting stat of the day. But anyways, let's...
You think it's interesting.
I
Cheers.
thought it was kind of a quick, cute little nugget. I mean, when you think
like laughing at your own jokes
UEFA
here.
Champions League, someone has to laugh at my jokes.
Well,
right? But good bounce back from Madrid, good reaction.
How far was the flight?
About 4,000 miles. There you go.
I was only kidding. But
yeah, look, this is, bounce back, expected. It makes not a jot of difference, really. This was very comfortable in the end. It's not going to take away the analysis and the pain and the questions from the weekend, where they struggled in quite a few areas, particularly the middle of the park, particularly the back four, particularly the left side of the back four, the defending or lack of crosses into the box. We saw it in the first 10 seconds, that long ball forward, and Huijsen, who had a very poor game at the weekend against Alexander Sorloth. He really struggled with his physicality. And that's an issue for Xabi Alonso. His team's looking at the Atleti game and saying, you know what, if we can get some width in our game and put good crosses into the box, they look as if they're struggling a little bit. So on top of that, and the team selection from the weekend, which I know we've discussed at length, Jude Bellingham, was he fit enough to start, blah, blah, blah. They're not really learning a lot from this, just putting it to the side, saying, well, that wasn't a disaster, we got the 3 points. I don't think anybody really got injured to know. Mbappe continues his good form, which is important for him because they're going to need him. But yeah, in terms of learning anything from this game, not a lot.
Robbo, as Craig said, it's hard to read too much into this kind of a result for Real Madrid in terms of bouncing back after what happened at the weekend. But for you, what stood out?
Well, they struggled for the first 15 minutes. They were quite nervy, and the opposition was trying to close them down. The opposition played in a 4-4-2, but it all changed when they played Arda Güler in the sort of number 10 role, and they weren't quite sure how to pick him up. So time and time again, the ball got played to him because the two centre-halves were dropping off because they didn't want to be beaten by Mbappe's pace. The two midfield players were pressing onto the two deep Real Madrid players, and it allowed Güler to pick up the ball and pick his passes. And in that number 10 role, which we haven't seen him in too often in recent times, he looked to be an outstanding passer of the ball. Great vision, and of course, Kylian Mbappe's performance today, when you see him play like that, his pace, his understanding where the space was, his finishing, I mean, he was absolutely world-class today. It was brilliant stuff, against, obviously, a very poor side.
Stevie, what's it out to you?
I mean, I guess if you want to look really deep, if you're Alonso, you're thinking, OK, we got stuffed in the Clásico. We lost 5 goals.
Madrid derby, Stephen.
The Madrid derby, I beg your pardon. We're going to spend the day on a plane. We're coming to somewhere we should win, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a big crowd, they're going to be energetic, the opposition's going to be up for it. I guess in some ways, if you want to, you can think, I'll find out who the slackers are, who's going to bottle it, who's up for this, who doesn't really fancy it. And I guess the answer to that is the bright start that Carriac made, I guess, was obvious was going to happen. But they come away from such a long journey, a tough weekend, with a 5-0 win. So if you're Alonso, you'll take that every day of the week.
The good news for him, I suppose, in one sense, if you're taking the positives from the weekend and from tonight and the start of the season, and there was really not many positives from the weekend at all. Maybe Arda Güler's goal and that sort of stuff, is that at least he doesn't have to worry about his star player. He's got a lot of other worries in terms of his team, but he doesn't have to go away and put his arm around his star player because he's a problem as well. Stevie, he's just doing it at the moment. It's the other facets of the game that he's got to consider. How do you get the best balance around Kylian Mbappe? Is it Vinicius? Is it Mastantuono on one side? Is it Arda Güler, as Robbo mentioned, behind? What do you do with Bellingham when he's up to full fitness? All these sort of scenarios, and then you get to the back four, but at least he doesn't have to worry about Kylian Mbappe sulking and not playing well because he's doing his bit. Unfortunately for him, he can do his bit all he wants. But if the other parts of the team don't operate to a high enough standard, they're not going to be successful this season. So that's something he's going to have to figure out very quickly, because we thought this was going to be a 2-horse race in the Liga after the start of the season, and it is very early, but Atleti have kind of chucked their hat back in the ring and said, You know, don't quite. Really, and I know they're hard to trust. Yeah. They're hard to trust over a long period because we've seen them fall away before, but they've at least chucked their hat back in the ring, and they have, you could argue, along with Mbappe, the informed player in European football, and Julian Alvarez up front, who's scoring goals for fun, he's assisting, he's doing everything. So they've chucked their hat back in the ring. It looks like it's going to be a really, really tight La Liga title race. And that means Xabi Alonso is going to have to figure this out very quickly. They have a huge squad. They had a terrible start to the season by their standards. They spent money again in the summer. But they've really had a brilliant week, starting from the Vallecano game to the Real Madrid game to this game here, where they just absolutely disposed of Frankfurt. And again, star players are in form. And the way they went about the victory over Real Madrid at the weekend was actually quite impressive. Although, even when they were 4-2 up and absolutely flying, looked as if they could score 5, 6 and 7, he did bring in all the subs as Steve McManaman touched on at the time to go back into that defensive, let's see the last 10 minutes out.
Cholo way.
And that's just his way. But they can, when they want to, they can play some good football, and they got a lot of very good attacking players. It just depends on the manager's mindset before and during games, what tactic they like to sort of work on and deliver. When it's the attacking one that we've seen in the last 3 games for sure, they're actually quite fun to watch. Yeah. They're really fun to watch, is when they go into this shell of just trying to shut games down for like an hour. That's where I think they have their problems.
Robbo, about a week or even a week and a half ago, we had some serious concerns about Atletico de Madrid, and it's still so early on in the season. We even called their game against Real Madrid a must-win for them, and maybe even Diego Simeone. But now, looking at what they've done in the last couple of days, are Atleti just an overall better team than we were giving them credit for?
Probably not. There's a word that you always use when you talk about Atleti, and that's aggression, or their defensive work, the aggression they show when they're defending their box and how they get around the field. Now, if they showed the same aggression in their front play, which they did in the last 3 games, and Craig just mentioned it, when they're getting balls into the box, Sorlot's winning balls, Alvarez is running off the back of him, they're getting players in the box at the right time, they're passing it forward, they're running forward, they are an excellent team to watch, and they're really dangerous. But the manager seems to keep wanting to go back into that defensive mode, to be nice and solid, and it just takes away their creativity. And over the course of the season, they won't be aggressive enough in the top third of the field on enough occasions to, I think, challenge for the title.
One of the things, and I might be wrong here again, some stato will probably correct me, but it seems to me is Atleti have no problem getting themselves in the right frame of mind for these kind of games.
The big ones.
The big ones. We saw it in the Champions League last year, we saw it in the Madrid derbies, the Barcelona games where there was a bunch of goals in those games, particularly I remember an absolute bonkers one at the Montjuic. But it seems like it's against a lot of the teams in the bottom half of La Liga, if we're just talking about going for the La Liga title, where they don't have that intensity, where they allow the opposition, a chunk more possession than they should. And if you look back to last year, there was a bunch of teams where we thought, right, that's, they're going to beat them, and they dropped points. They dropped points to a lot of the lower teams last year, and that knocked them sort of off course and off momentum.
Don't you think, though, that one of the problems that I think they have is when the manager gets involved, when they're going forward, when they're trying to attack, when they're trying to create, as you say, they're great, but then it's when, this season in particular, they've gone ahead, not just by a goal, but a couple of times by a couple of goals, and then they've sat and they've lost all the momentum. And then when you lose all the momentum and the opposition gets on the front foot, they don't have the type of players that they had 3 and 4 years ago that just sit tight and defend. Because you knew when they were 2-0 up, that was it. Yeah. The game was over. The game was done. You look at the team they've got now and you look at that back line, I'm sorry, I'm not a huge fan of Langley and Almiron. I'm just not. And so to me, when they stop going forward and they stop trying to play, I don't think they're really sure of how to go about it, because I just don't think they have the players that are capable of doing it.
It was the kind of savagery before. It was Jimenez and it was Savic.
Godin and all these guys.
Savic and Diego Godin. It was a fight every week. You know what I mean? you know, people like Godin and Savage would put their head in where some people wouldn't even put their boot. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it was. But Stevie's right. They've kind of morphed away from that. And I think that's a good thing in a sense, because they're trying to be more attacking. I think he is trying to be, and the goals will back it up. They are more offensive than they used to be. But there's something in the manager, there's just a little gremlin in there that keeps making him go back at times to that old DNA. And I think at times that gets them in trouble, because it just basically hands the impetus back to the other team. But what we've seen in the last week or so from them, let's give them their fair due, what we've seen in the last 7 or 8 days has been fantastic.
Yeah, at least he's allowing them to score a couple more goals and then reverting to that. Before they'd score one and he'd go back.
He probably hates 5 goals.
He probably hates 5 goals. He's like, come on, we should have locked up shop after 1-0. All right, here are some more La Liga games coming up this weekend. All of La Liga games on ESPN Plus this season. Make sure to tune in.
But games where they can give Kane and maybe 1 or 2 others a rest for a long season, because he's in his 30s now, Harry Kane, and a bit like Lewandowski at Barcelona, you need to be able to rotate these players. I mean, the player wants to play 50 games a year, but it's tough. So he's there to supplement the likes of Kane in games where Vincent Kompany thinks, well, we're playing weaker opposition, I can give him a game. Today's game, he played with Kane. I can't tell you, as I said, I'm not going to lie to you, I can't tell you if it was a 4-4-2, because that game was on the far screen. And on the far screen for obvious reasons. Because the result, we knew what the result was going to be. But fair play to Jackson. He's gone in there. He's been slandered by most, including us. He's had Uli Hoeneß, coming out saying he'll never be a Bayern player longer than a few months anyway. So it's not easy for the lad. And to be fair to him, he's on the score sheet. Yeah. But he's going to be a squad player for Vincent Kompany between now and the end of the season.
Robert, much like Real Madrid's game, it's hard to read too much into this result for Bayern Munich. But if we're talking about Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, who do you think will have a deeper run from what we've seen so far in the Champions League?
It's very, very difficult to say. I mean, I still think Real Madrid, if they get everything right, can still be a really good team. We know that. They've got players to come back in. They need to get the best out of Vinicius Jr. They need to get the best out of Bellingham when he comes back. The manager's got to pick the right side. He's got to get the right balance. And if he does that, Real Madrid will still challenge for the Champions League. And I think you can say the same for Bayern. Are they good enough defensively? Is Vincent Kompany good enough tactically against the very best opposition in Europe? I'm not so sure about that. They leave themselves fairly open at the back, just leave the 2 centre-halves 2-on-2 at times, 2 full-backs push in. That's a dangerous way to play. So I still think Real Madrid will be a slightly better bet than Bayern Munich. But what Jackson does bring is, because Harry Kane doesn't run in behind anymore, if those two play together, there's a good combination. Jackson runs in behind, Harry Kane sits that little bit deeper, picks up the ball and starts to make things happen and still scores his goals.
Now, producer Mike wanted to shoehorn that question in about who's going to go further. And we were like, go to Robbo on that one.
I felt it.
Because Real Madrid, it's like...
It's Real Madrid in the Champions League.
How long's a piece of string? Their Champions League record is excellent, but, at the weekend, unless that was a one-off...
Well, look at PSG this time last year. They couldn't win they could hardly win a game in the Champions League, and look how they finished.
They struggled to get out of that.
Yeah, they just made it.
They just made it out of the bottom 8. Mm-hmm. I think themselves and Man City were vying for 2 of the... and most teams that you would consider one of the favourites to win the competition, who almost dropped into that bottom 8. And so that turnaround, as Stevie said, from them was just incredible. I mean, they were the best team by far in Europe when the season finished last year. The way that they manoeuvred the ball and the way they played. So you just don't know. What I would say, though, Luis Enrique had everything in place that he wanted. Yeah. It just was that they were not playing particularly well at the start of the season. But once they figured it out and got the balance right within the team and the personnel within the team, fullbacks, Hakimi and Mendes were absolute. Vitinha and Neves in the middle of the park with Fabian Ruiz. And then, obviously, you could supplement it. It was Barcola, there was Dewey, there was Gonzalo Ramos, if he wanted to play up front. And, of course, the Ballon d'Or winner himself, Ousmane Dembele. So everything clicked at the right time for PSG. Could you see that happening for Bayern and Real Madrid? No. I think there is too many issues for them to solve, for them to go on a run like PSG went on last year, where they were just basically dispatching everybody. I mean, they were a little lucky in a sense in the Arsenal game. That was a tighter game fall them over two legs. But most of the other teams, they just completely pasted.
Don't you think that Real, if we're talking about Bayern and Real Madrid,
Yep.
don't you think there's a possibility that Alonso could find another gear for this Real Madrid team? I don't think Bayern have got any other gears. I think Bayern are what they are right now and will not change. I just think that if Alonso can sort out particularly the middle of the park for Real Madrid, I think Real Madrid's got another gear that's there. Just depends where he finds it.
But the thing is, what I would say with Bayern is they're not as reliant on one player at the moment. It's Luis Diaz, it's Kane,
Gnabry,
it's Elise, Gnabry. They got 4 or 5 before you even get to I know Musiala's out long term, so that's a blow for them. But you're guaranteed the goals with Kane. It's pretty much you are with Mbappe, to be fair, at Real Madrid. But I would say at the moment they've got more players that look like Bayern that are going to chip in, that are going to have Harry Kane's back when he's having a bad day. At the moment, for Real Madrid, maybe it's Arda Güler, maybe it's Mastantuono, but they're young players, particularly Mastantuono. They're young players, and we've seen glimpses from Vinicius Junior, but just glimpses.
Yeah.
We haven't seen the consistency. And until we see that, I think, certainly in terms of going forward, I think Bayern have a little bit more to offer across that front line than Real Madrid at the moment.
All right, well, Chelsea just get the win there. Robbo, we just want to apologize on behalf of our producer, Mike, who forced you to watch this game, because Chelsea, yes, getting the job done, but they don't make it pretty, do they?
Well, they didn't dominate the play. They had 59% possession, as you just saw there. But you couldn't say they dominated the opposition. They gave the ball away quite cheaply in midfield at times. It was a fairly decent game in terms of the counter-attacks. Benfica had their chances in the first half and didn't make the most of them. Benfica, I thought, defended quite well for long periods. The player that really stood out was Neto out on the right-hand side. He cut on his left foot. He got 3 or 4 good crosses. George hardly had a touch of the ball. Garnacho was okay at best. And Caicedo and Fernandes, did their bit in midfield. But Chelsea at the moment have got 1 or 2 problems. They at times pass it too slowly. They give it away cheaply in bad areas. And they have problems defensively. Not today, because Benfica didn't quite have enough to break them down. They got a lot of crosses into the box. They had 1 or 2 good moments in the first half, but didn't then carry it on in the second half. So it was a very competitive game. It was a very even game. Chelsea won by their own goal, and that was about it, really.
Craig, I know we talked about this a couple of seasons, a season or 2 ago, about Arsenal and when they were accumulating a lot of cards and if discipline was an issue there. Now we're seeing Chelsea once again in another game being reduced to 10 men. Is this becoming a problem for Enzo Maresca?
Well, let's look at it's not been over-aggressive. Well, that one was maybe a silly high boot. I'm trying to think back. The Brighton game, what was the Brighton sending off again? Do we remember?
Chalobah for Brighton and then Sanchez against Man United.
They gave the ball. That's right. They gave the ball away. It got pinched.
Chalobah's weekend.
And Chalobah was denying a clear goal-scoring opportunity. That was just bad play. He was put in a position. And the Robert Sanchez one was bad decision-making. Getting himself in the wrong position so early in a game. And so I wouldn't say that's bad discipline. The high boot is a little bit. He only come on in 60 minutes. João Pedro. So he was only just on the field. So to get 2 bookings, and particularly when you're on a yellow, to raise your boot as high as that, whether there's contact or not, is just crazy. So I don't think, to go back to the point about Arsenal, the Arsenal ones from the centre halves were, I think, over-aggression, getting involved with the referee, dissent, all these kind of things that you can, Leandro Trossard kicking the ball away, then moaning about. That's something that you can stop. What you can't stop is when you're put in a bad position by your team making a mistake, which Sanchez was to a point, which Chalobah was to a point. So that's not something I would worry about too much. But if my player's getting sent off for dissent or 2-footed tackles or stuff like that on a more regular basis, that's something that you need to address. Obviously, it's not brilliant when you keep going down to 10 men. And if they do it at the weekend against Liverpool, they're going to be in trouble. But it is 3 red cards in 4 games if you include the cup tie against Lincoln.
If you look at all these red cards individually and isolate them, as Craig said, it's not. It's not really. No, it's not. It's situations that have occurred that are kind of out with the person's control. Again, you could say João Pedro shouldn't be, but João Pedro only had eyes for the ball, raised his foot too high, he didn't make any contact. I mean, he's not kicked somebody in the face. So in isolation, they're really not what you would say disciplinary problems, as opposed to the Arsenal ones where it's kicking the ball away and getting in the ref's face. That's a completely different ball game.
Was it not as well? There was a Trossard one at Man City. There was the Declan Rice little toe poke at home, which was very, it seemed very silly, but it was the correct decision. And then there was, I think, Ben White at Wolves, might have been the year before, where he had 2 yellows within 10 seconds or so in the right back position. So, it's stuff like that as a manager, you've got to say, listen, I get it. It's an emotional game, and sometimes you want to have a moan at the ref, and sometimes you're frustrated. But in this day and age in particular, you just don't want to be getting red cards for silly little petulant things. And Arsenal were pretty bad for it for a year or two. They seem to have cleaned that up. But 3 reds for Chelsea in the space of, 10 days or so is far from ideal.